we've learned absolutely that over the years, it's always important to hear from industry experts, but it's just as important to hear from your peers out there in the field, working at the retail level day in and day out. And that's why joining us today is a very forward-thinking member of the dealership community who's here to share his experience in redefining the post-pandemic dealership workforce. So I'd like to welcome John Malishenko from Germain Automotive to the Zoom stage. After graduating college, John joined the automotive OEM world, working for various manufacturers and working with hundreds of dealerships throughout the country. The majority of that 15 years were spent working with Toyota and Lexus, both at their Tier 1 and Tier 2 offices. And in 2001, John joined the Germain Automotive organization as GM of their new Lexus store in Columbus, Ohio. Now, after 7 years at the helm there, John became the director of operations and eventually the COO, his right-hand executive to Steve Germain and the Germain Automotive Group. The group today currently consists of 20 brands and 18 rooftops with over 1,100 associates spread throughout stores in Ohio, Florida, and Michigan. The Germain Group's mission is to attract, develop, and retain exceptional people with the goal of creating loyalty beyond reason, one customer at a time. And with that, I'm pleased to welcome John. John, the Zoom is all yours.
Thanks, Mike. Good to be with everybody today. The topic that we're looking to discuss is redefining the post-pandemic dealership workforce. Fairly broad topic, but an exciting discussion. So appreciate the intro. Let's talk a little bit about what we encountered. March 2020, COVID hit everyone hard. I mean, we were faced with tough decisions, as everybody was, and had to make changes we never thought we'd have to make. They say that necessity is the mother of invention. Well, looking back, that was absolutely the case with us. In fact, a couple of months prior, I sat with my director of operations in Florida, and we felt like there was a market correction coming, and we had actually discussed what we jokingly called our doomsday plan. And the discussion was, if we had to, what's essential? What would we change? What would we keep? What would we get rid of? And that ended up being sort of a prophetic discussion as we experienced what we did in March. So today I want to talk a little bit about our story, and how we, in reducing staff and lead providers, we actually increased productivity and profitability. Along the way, we also improved associate and customer engagement and reduced turnover. Sort of counterintuitive. And while the idea of less is more is counterintuitive to some, in our case, it's paid huge dividends. I'll also give you some lessons we learned from our experience during the pandemic that you can take back to your dealerships. So let's talk about our response to the pandemic and what specifically we did that ultimately started what became a complete re-engineering of the organization. So step one, send everyone home, turn everything off. In Ohio and Michigan, our showrooms were shut down, and while fixed operations were still open, we had some pretty strict shutdown orders. Wasn't the same everywhere in the country, but in this case, it was the appropriate response. In retrospect, it was probably also the most important thing we did. Although it wasn't intentional, we essentially wiped the slate clean and began the process of rebuilding our stores to align with what ended up being a very new and different marketplace. This was the hard part. We furloughed about 60% of our workforce and left a skeleton crew of managers back to manage any leads and calls that came in, typically a general manager and a sales manager. Ironically, with our most experienced, autonomous, and talented people at the store, interesting things started to happen. We weren't sure what to expect. We weren't sure how many cars we would sell, but the calls started to come. People wanted to transact. The difference was they wanted to transact differently. So let's talk a little bit about that. Pacing, spacing, and virtual transactions. These were dynamics that evolved out of COVID that really started to change, our organization, starting with virtual transaction. So the shift to virtual was really the only option we had in Ohio and Michigan. And people couldn't come in the store, didn't really want to, but they needed a car and they wanted to transact. So we started asking each customer one simple question up front. How do you want to buy the car? This is not a question we'd ever asked. And, oftentimes the response was, well, what are my options? In this way, we actually began to co-create a transaction with the customer. It was more collaborative. And in most cases, it was very different than what we'd done historically. Almost 70% of the transaction was being done virtually. We were negotiating price, putting trade values on cars, and we were doing that via text, via phone, via video chat, really at the discretion of the customer. When we did deliver the vehicle, sometimes, we delivered it at the dealership. Oftentimes, we were delivering it in a parking lot of a restaurant. So again, in that way, it was a very different type of transaction. But we decided to be adaptable. We decided to move towards the customer. But we became very virtual very quickly, and it started to change the nature of the transactions. So let's talk about pacing and spacing. One of the dynamics of a transaction that's more virtual, with 70% of the process remote, customers were making one visit to the store to consummate, and even then they didn't want to be there long. These dynamics presented an opportunity to control workflow through intentional scheduling. So think about a doctor's office. The doctor doesn't say, when do you want to come in? Which is often what we would say to a customer trying to schedule an appointment. The doctor says, how about Tuesday at 4? That doesn't work. How about Thursday at 3? So we started a process of trying to balance out workflow. We were staffed down. So with people working from home or at home, they were more able to adapt their schedules, and we were then able to sell cars throughout the day and throughout the week. So that shift in workflow, that leveling out, so to speak, of the workflow, supported a lower level of staffing, plus the added benefit of staying busy throughout the day. Gone were the periods of intense periods of activity on a weekend, followed by long periods of activity, oftentimes in the early parts of the week. It was a much more efficient model for sure. And as we experienced these changes, we saw an opportunity. We saw a window of opportunity as we started to get busier and business started to pick up. We had to make a decision about who to bring back and how many people to bring back. Business began to really strengthen in late May and June, and then there was evidence. Already we were selling a lot of cars and generating a lot of revenue, and we were doing it with fewer people than we ever thought was possible, partially because of the transaction being more virtual, partially because we were spreading the workflow out. But all those things were creating a new and different environment. So as we decided to rebuild the stores, we had to sort of embrace these new realities and not try to become what we were prior to the start of the pandemic. So there was evidence that we could produce more with less and still create a win-win for our associates and our customers. And throughout all this, that was our goal. Everybody had to win in the deal, not just the enterprise, but the associates and the customers. If we couldn't do that, if we couldn't ensure that, then we weren't interested in making the change. So that was a common sort of, compass point for us. As such, we wanted to guard against a return to business as usual, because business wasn't usual. And we didn't want to really have to refurlough anyone. So we were very thoughtful about who we brought back and what. This mantra, forced us to sort of be intentional and thoughtful about staffing levels, and it served us well. This sort of led to, a term that's been thrown about a lot, that we use a lot, called fewer but better. We were able to continue operating with fewer people. Obviously, when we brought people back, we brought back people, our best folks, and the folks that we thought were best suited to this new environment. And in doing so, even as our volumes returned to historic norms, we were able to see, for example, sales consultants we averaged about 11 cars per sales consultant prior to the pandemic. That rose to 16. That's a 40-50% shift in productivity. When you take that across an entire organization for an entire year, the impacts are staggering. So these dynamics were allowing us to be more productive with fewer people. As an added benefit, we are fewer but better, and we'll talk about what that allows in the outcome section. But now with inventory shortages and a challenging labor market, we're less affected due to this fewer but better approach. The leanness of the organization is well aligned to what we're experiencing in the market. So let's talk about outcomes. How do we know this works? As I started to really dig in and try to understand what was happening, the data was really compelling. So let's take a look at outcomes. So overall, when you push more work through the hands of better people, the overall quality of the work improves. So again, let's think about sales consultants. Whereas we had, let's use an example of 10 sales consultants. You have 2 that are, let's call them A's. You have 3 that are B's, 3 C's, and maybe 2 D's, right? Some new people. By eliminating 2 D's and a C, the overall quality of the work improved by 20%. So that's a 20% improvement in conversion rate. That's a 20% improvement in gross. That's a 20% improvement in customer experience. So that really is at the core of what we started to see in outcome. We were putting more work in the hands of better people, and they were doing better work. They were also making fewer mistakes. Your best people not only can do more work and do it better, they're experienced. They don't make mistakes. They don't require as much attention. So there were incredible efficiencies. The managers, ironically, we were setting records and we had fewer people, yet everybody was less stressed because the people that were coming to work knew what to do. They showed up and they were busy because we were balancing the work out through this appointment scheduling and workflow. People were busy from the beginning to the end of the day. And that's another reason they were able to get so much more done. So workflow is an important part of this. Better people and fewer people are a big part of this too. There was improved compensation for those that remained. So we saw a higher level of engagement in our associates. We saw less turnover. We were very thoughtful not to burn them out. They were selling more cars, but they were actually working less hours. We started to close the stores earlier to try to protect, people's quality of life. But because the workflow was spread, this didn't require anybody to work longer. And that was a key focal point for us. As I said, less turnover, higher average tenure, and ultimately massive increases in gross per employee or revenue per person. So here's some hard numbers. This is August of 2019, which if you think about it, right, was the last time, for lack of a better term, we operated in a normal world, right? And now 2 years down the road, this is what we look like. So same stores, in 2019, we had 1,100 associates. Today we have 970. So somewhere between a 13 and 15% reduction in overall staff. This is what's happened to our gross. So this is our year-to-date gross through August for the organization. It was 85 million in 2019, almost 18 million in 2021, almost a 50%. So this is total revenue. So I've got 970 people versus 1,100 producing 50% more gross. The net effect is a gross per associate number that went from, just under 10,000 to over 15,000. So those dynamics of fewer but better were powerful. And everywhere we turned and everywhere we looked, we kept seeing, really, these numbers were not numbers that we would have ever, on our most optimistic day predicted. And it transcended the issues of front-end gross that were being driven by, reduced inventories and increased demand. We saw efficiencies and revenue increases in all areas of the business and all departments throughout this entire time period. So let's talk about the lessons we learned. Ultimately, I think the biggest thing we did was, we let the customers take the lead. We let go of all that we knew about, sales process and selling, and because we were in a very different situation. By asking them how they wanted to buy the car, we created a collaborative experience, and the defenses went down, and the process was easier, faster, and ultimately the customer was much happier. Most of our customers tell us this is the way they want to buy their cars now and in the future. They did it initially to stay safe. Now they want to do it because it's just a better way to buy a car. They wanted to make sure they were safe, so we adapted. And in a market that is as volatile and uncertain as we're in, and as much change as there has been and will continue to be, adaptability may be the single most important attribute for any organization. We have a saying these days, which is we're open to everything and attached to nothing when it comes to realigning to the market. Digging your heels in and defending old positions is not something that's going to probably be very effective in this environment. We also learned there were a lot of inefficiencies in our processes. So we had to be willing to sort of let go of old processes, evaluate them, ask whether they still made sense, whether they aligned to the changing market. So making changes in how we scheduled appointments, closing the store earlier, and a myriad of other things didn't reduce what we sold. It actually made us more efficient, more productive. And as I said, the win-win-win that we're always looking for, was supported. Wins for the enterprise, wins for the associate, wins for the customer. And lastly, we started to redefine how we hired. We were the people that we brought back weren't the people that you typically would be the traditionally the top people. They had different skills, their ability to use tech, their ability to adapt to a virtual transaction, and understanding of the entire process, and primarily people that were adaptable and flexible to making changes as the marketplace required it became a huge part of how we decided to bring people back, and continues to be when we look at how we hire people. Now we're over a year later, we've adjusted our hiring process to help us find the right people, whether it's changing roles and job descriptions, relying more heavily on employee referrals, because nobody knows better what's required in this new reality than the people that are doing it. So employee referrals, I think, move up in relevance as a result. We had to do things differently. We had to do more than just post jobs on job boards in order to find the right people. So we could continue our fewer but better approach. Every time we hire someone, we either strengthen or weaken the organization. I believe that. Our goal is to never weaken it, even if that means extending the onboarding process significantly to ensure it. All too often we felt like we needed to put somebody in a productive role in order to justify their pay, but oftentimes we cost ourselves more revenue in doing so. So we don't do that anymore. That's it for me. I appreciate your time and attention, and hope that it was helpful.
John, thanks so much for sharing your story with us, and really a job well done to you and the Germain team over the last year and a half.
Thanks, Mike.
We're now going to open up to a little fireside chat. This will be moderated by our friend Jamie Butters, who is the executive editor of Automotive News. And in his role at Automotive News, Jamie leads all U.S. reporting teams, as well as production of the print publication and online reports. He joined the Automotive News team as its chief content officer in 2018. Now, Butters has covered the auto industry in Detroit for more than 2 decades. First was at the Detroit Free Press as a reporter and editor, and then a stint at Bloomberg News Detroit, mostly as an editor and team leader. On a personal note, Butters' first auto show was in Tokyo in 1997 when he wrote about a new kind of car called a hybrid, and how Toyota saw that as a stepping stone to cars powered purely by electricity and eventually by hydrogen fuel cells. A pretty prescient experience for you, Butters. He started out studying journalism at the University of Iowa, graduated with a degree in finance from the University of Kentucky, and also studied the economy of China as a Knight Wallace Fellow at the University of Michigan. Jamie, we're so glad to have you to moderate this fireside chat with John and Adam. So I'll let you take it away, pal.
Great. My pleasure to be here. Thanks again, John, for, as Mike said, for sharing your story. I do want to encourage everyone to send in questions. I have plenty of questions for you, but if the audience has questions, please put them into the chat, and I'll see them there and relay them. I guess my first thing, though, from me, I kind of want to tease apart this seeming paradox about having fewer but better employees at a time when employees are so hard to find. I'm sure there are some dealers out there going, "Oh, well, that sounds great if I could get all the best ones," but maybe it's hard for them to find the best ones now, or to bring back the best ones. How do you tease through that? You talked a little bit there at the end about the importance of referrals and all that, but take us a little deeper into how you really secure the best employees, the better employees in these difficult times.
I think you have to be intentional. I mean, the one of the things that in our mission, as Adam mentioned, is the goal is to attract, develop, and retain. Attracting, that's the recruiting piece. Developing is continual training, but retention, requires intention. We start that by, asking everybody, where they want to be in 1 year, 3 year, 5 years. I think my goal is that everybody that we hire stays with us for their entire career. That may be Pollyannish or idealistic, right? But I think that's how you have to look at it. So the question is, do you have a culture, right? Are you engaging with your people in discussions? What drives retention? So the key to not having a hiring problem is not having turnover. So, again, it goes without saying, but I don't think in our industry, oftentimes we're intentional enough about retention of associates. So I think that's the starting point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that is a high ideal, but it's good to set your targets high. No turnover whatsoever. Adam, what do you see out in the rest of the industry? Is this the way? How unusual is John out there in the market?
Well, I mean, John is a pretty unusual guy, I have to say, and that, if I look at an automotive group that's continually in the top 1 or 2% of operators on the human capital side of the business, I look at Germain. I mean, they're always pulling, the status quo instead of following it. And I think, to his great advantage, performance-wise, as he demonstrated, I mean, those gross profits per head numbers are eye-popping. How is it possible we can make more money with fewer people in a business where, the last time we all got together, everyone was wondering about how to have enough people standing on the floor to take all the ups that would walk in the front door? Well, I think those days are gone, frankly. Everyone's doing this now, either by intention or by default. It is a fact that dealerships are operating with lower headcount today than they did 2 years ago. Now, if that's by design and with intention, you can turn that into some pretty special operating outcomes. If it's by default, it's likely that you feel busier than you did 2 years ago because you're understaffed relative to the inefficient retailing processes that you had in your store. And so, listen to John talk. I mean, I can imagine, if I was speaking at an event 2 years ago and I recommended that retailers closed up shop at 6 p.m. on a Friday, that people would be apoplectic and never come back to hear me ever again. Like, are you kidding me? You can't do that. This is a retail business. Didn't you know that? Well, I don't know. If you're doing things like shifting to orders, front loading the process, set it with expectations, and just, navigating a completely different buying experience and doing it in a way that generates the kind of results John just shared, Do you need to be open until 9 p.m. on a Friday? I don't think you do, right? You just don't need to do that. And so what about our industry changes when you take the grind out of it? It's so much possibility unleashed from a human capital perspective in terms of the kind of talent we can hire when we design our process around what the consumer wants, and we start to treat job opportunities like the products that they are, and target them at the consumers that we want to bring into the business. It's just a different way of doing it.
Yeah. So John, when you do get the referrals and you find somebody who you think is going to be a fit, who seems to have the right skills, take us a little into how you do the onboarding. What kind of training do they have? How long does it take before, if they're a sales associate, how long does it take before they can be put on the floor? How does that work for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the key to recruiting is, do you know what you want? Do you know what works for you? I mean, have you taken time to sort of, really think through what you're looking for? I think that's a starting point. The point that you bring up. So attract, develop, retain, right? We got pretty good at attracting with Adam and Hireology's help, right? We built career sites. We have people dedicated to that process. So we got pretty efficient at the hiring part. Still had turnover, most of it in the first year, right? And I was frustrated. And the thing is we weren't spending enough time training and developing, right? We were trying to do it at the store level. So we built Germain Academy, which was a dedicated, commitment to continual development. And I can assure you, our average tenure went up and our turnover went down as we invested more training. We train everybody in the organization continually. We made a commitment to it. That helps a lot if the goal is to, improve the quality of your workforce, fewer but better. It starts with having an intentional development strategy, because that's how you're going to increase average tenure and reduce turnover. So training, commitment to training. I don't think there's any way to achieve success without that. To your question on onboarding. So this sounds bad, but I'm going to say it anyway. So I don't want to bring anybody in the organization that's worse than my worst person. Because in essence, if I do that, I weaken the organization, right? So my goal is to wherever that minimum standard of performance is, right? If I don't at least meet that or elevate beyond it, I'm getting worse. So what's the point? Why would I hire somebody to make myself worse? It seems silly, right? So the problem is that oftentimes we hire people because we're trying to deal with a coverage issue or a headcount issue, and coverage goes back to hours, by the way. So, and we're paying them, so we feel like we have to get something from them when we put them to work. The problem is they're not skilled yet. They haven't been trained. They haven't been, and they do more damage than good. And that's what I think we really learned was when we eliminated the mistakes and the less skilled people from the productive work, that alone, elevated performance. So I think the answer to your question is as different as the individual. Until they can demonstrate competence, you don't put them to work. You train, you shadow, you do it as long as you need to. And I would even go as far as saying, if you hire someone and they can't get to that competence level, you don't ever put them to work.
Well, so that leads right into another great question from the audience is, it's not necessarily clear, especially as you're looking for a different set of skill sets. It's not always entirely clear who is going to be better than your worst person, right? And maybe this goes back to how you market those jobs, but how do you identify or just avoid turning off, the person who might have the right skills, but maybe doesn't have experience in a dealership and thinks, well, it's probably not the job for me, even though they might have some of those skills that you really want?
Well, I think, there's a plug for employee referrals, right? The perception of our industry and who we are. I mean, it's up to us to deal with that. We try to do it through our career site, right? We try to educate people a lot about who we are and how we think and how innovative and digital we are, right? Basically trying to change perceptions and talk about the opportunities and the possibilities that exist. So we're always trying to leverage, the reality of who we are and what we do and what we believe in versus whatever the perceptions are. So I think you have to, again, be intentional. You have to, that's a marketing strategy. It's not, I believe that is selling a car, right? Investing money in a career site. You're welcome, Adam. Is actually selling cars, right? Because I'm attracting a higher quality of individual. Adam said it earlier, and I've said it a long time. I believe traditional experience is a liability in today's marketplace, right? So by the very nature of trying to hire talent and skill and not experience, you better be a learning organization. You better have training and be committed to it, because otherwise I don't know that you can. I think that's the right way to go, but we had to develop a training academy to be able to hire those people that you're talking about. But once we did, and they walked in on day one of their orientation and they saw, a dedicated space and a training director, it changed the way they viewed us. And I think it anchored them as they enter the organization.
Yeah. Adam, do you have anything you'd like to add to that? I know John's evangelizing for you pretty well, but you might have a few details you'd like to add.
Well, I mean, conceptually, recruiting is a sales and marketing process. It's a recruiting, like selling, is a transfer of trust. And one of the questions, to the panel here is, I struggle with focusing on experience and deterring valuable applicants from applying because they come from a different industry. How do I address that? Well, you ask the question, what would someone moving from another industry into automotive be worried about coming in? You can anticipate those things. You're having these conversations, and someone coming into the business is going to be worried about pay plans. They're going to be worried about retail hours. They're going to be worried about, hey, I heard there weren't any cars to sell. Is that true? How do I make money if we don't have vehicles? What kind of flexible workplace policies do I have? I'm coming from an industry that's got X. What does this have? These are all common questions, trying to understand, is this an industry for me? And so what you do is you preempt those objections. You answer those questions up front, knowing the profile of your ideal, career industry transferee, and you have a section on your career site dedicated to switching careers or industries, right? Considering automotive, right? And just talk about it. All the media today, the labor stories are all about hospitality and service industry workers realizing that there are better opportunities for the same or better money with a lot less grind. People who can hustle and get it done and have, kind of wired for consumer experience, but looking for something better. We are something better. And I think we have to market to those individuals very, very specifically and intentionally, to use John's word.
And career path is such a huge part of that too. I mean, at some point, being intentional about a career path, I think those folks that you're talking about, right? If I want to keep them and I'm going to get them to come into my industry, right? I have to have a path. And I think that changes based on the individual, right? I mean, we hired someone from Vroom recently, to come in. And so we're reversing back. I mean, I'm interviewing data science people and AI people, right? Because I have that information. I have partners who manage that for me, but I need somebody inside the organization that can facilitate and champion that activity, right? So, we really I question everything around me. I mean, it's just my nature, right? And wonder why, why do we do this? And does this still make sense? And in an environment that's changing constantly, you have to question your processes. You have to question everything that you're doing and just say, does this still work? Does this still make sense? Does it align? And not, I think it comes down to, not resisting change. It's about embracing change and accepting the realities of the world that we're living in. I think, So, yeah, you find yourself in new and different places a lot, but, there's a lot that goes in. We've had success bringing these folks in. I've got people that have come into the industry directly out of college with no previous experience and have moved rapidly up through our organization and are doing remarkable things for us. So, there's lots of, and there's lots of good stories to tell.
We're getting a bunch of great questions from the audience. I want to just keep channeling those to you. This one you kind of touched on, even a little with that last answer about career planning, and really giving a lot of thought to the individual's needs. But we have a question particularly about retention with sales staff. Do you think retention bonuses have any value, or is it really around things like flexibility and future opportunity? And if they just, how do you try to think about things like that, if that feels like a useful lever or not?
Yeah, I think if you're doing it right, you don't need incentives and spiffs. I've been very blessed, right? I got 20 stores, and I've not had a GM leave in I can't remember, right? They're all very talented. They could go other places and make, probably more money, and they get recruited all the time. They don't leave because of the autonomy and the culture and the environment that they work in. So my point is with that is money's important, but anybody that's been in the automotive industry any amount of time we all have worked in good cultures and bad cultures, good environments and not so good environments. When you lead from there, right? I think if you're truly committed to trying to retain people, and it starts with culture, it starts with your leadership. It absolutely starts with your leadership and the people that you put in charge, because the cultures are a reflection of whoever runs the place. And you do have to stand for something. I mean, we have mission and core values. A lot of people do, but we don't make any decision or do anything that doesn't align to it. So I think, again, I used to think mission statements were sort of fluffy, but I don't anymore. I mean, we really, we took our time. I think it reflects who we are. And so I think you got to stand for something, and you gotta, you gotta be committed to it.
Yeah. Another question. Oh, go ahead, Adam.
Well, I think retention is about meeting expectations. And, that doesn't get talked about often enough. You can set big expectations, but if you fail to meet them, you break a promise. And that's when, the process of that person exiting your organization begins. And there's a question in the chat window from Martha. Hello, Martha. What happens if I have 2 stores? How do I do this? Right? How do I sell career path if I've got 1 or 2 stores? Well, you don't sell what you don't have, right? You don't set yourself up to miss expectations. What you do is you highlight the things that you believe someone is going to find positive. So, if you're a Germain and you've got now 20 stores, congratulations, John, by the way, if you've got, a large platform, what you're offering is, diversity of product, the ability to move around the organization, the ability to change roles, scalability, your career, you can work here forever. Look at how big this can be. 1 or 2 stores, you're not offering that. What you're offering is the opportunity to work directly with ownership. You're offering the ability to be a core member of the team. And if you feel like, look, if I can get 2 or 3 good years out of people before they graduate to some bigger opportunity, you know what? That's a good model also for smaller platform operators. And so what I'm saying to people is, look, I'm going to, if you join us, I'm going to ask for 3 years.
Right.
And at the end of 3 years, you can tell me you want to leave. You can tell me you want to stay, and I hope you stay. But what I can promise you is at the end of 3 years, I'm going to get you ready for whatever's next in your career. I hope that's here, but it could be somewhere else. Both are great outcomes, but I guarantee you we're going to get there together. I can do that with a single point store in the middle of nowhere. All right. I can get you ready and deliver on that expectation. And if that's what I promise coming in, that's okay. Right. Not everyone can offer employment for life.
You've got to ask that question, though. I mean, that's the key, right? I mentioned earlier, right? whether if it's a new employee, where do you want to be in 1 year? If it's an established, where do you want to be in 3 years, 5 years? Do you know the answer to that question? If you haven't asked, you don't know. If you don't, Adam mentioned, alignment, meeting expectations. If you don't know what they expect or what they aspire to, then you can't align with it, right? So it starts with, have you asked that question? And do you know? And that's what I push on my managers is when I can get somebody to the switch to flip for them to go from working for me to saying, this is where I want to be, right? This is where I want to be. And that doesn't happen quickly, right? But there is but once people go there, I mean, they start to act differently and think differently. They start to behave with a long-term view. We've all been in that situation. It changes how we operate. And I think it makes us better. So my goal is always to try to flip that switch for as many people as I can, right? I want everybody to say, this is where I want to be. And so how do you do that? You do that through relationships, connection, communication, but it starts with asking those questions.
Another question, I think maybe we're looking at the rest of the business. What do you see as the biggest threat to the retail industry? Obviously, there's the COVID brings a lot of baggage, including the sort of the chip shortage and the vehicle shortage sort of come out of COVID. But how are you grappling with that, and what are the other sort of front burner issues for you?
Well, I've referenced this a couple of times. There's a lot of speculation in the marketplace about everything, right? Where are the cars? What about the chips? What about electrification? What about this? What about that? Don't be left behind, right? If you don't do this, this is going to happen to you, right? So I finally, decided that nobody knows. I mean, nobody knows what's going to happen for sure, right? And I don't even need to know, but I need to be able to move in the direction that the market, when the market does decide to move, or decides that it's going to fully embrace electric or not, right? I need to be able to move, change, and align with it. So I think speculation is a loser's game. At least that's my opinion, right? So I just need to make sure that I hire people, create an organization that is adaptable. And I said it earlier, I think it's the most important commodity for any business, especially in our business, right? But do you embrace change? Do you build that into your culture? Do you build that into how you hire? Do you ask for and expect that, of your folks?
Adam, did you have anything you want to add to that?
Well, John said it so well. I mean, we're not here to forecast the weather, I guess, but kind of run through the checklist of the things you can control. Can you control manufacturers' stair-step programs being, evil and harmful? No. Can you control tax policy? No. Can you control EV incentives for consumers? No, you can't. You can control who you put on your payroll and how you conduct business. That's about it. And John nailed it on adaptability. That said, and completely different conference to be talking to this topic, but I think the emerging threat to the retail model as it currently exists is the fact it's like what happens to fixed cost absorption when we are servicing vehicles with 4 or 5 moving parts? Like, we're going to sell a lot more tires and wear and tear items because EVs, have to be serviced differently on that stuff. But like the whole notion of how we make money and pay for fixed costs is going to change. And it's not going to matter until it really matters. And when it really matters, it's, this becomes a scale game really quickly. And this is, again, is way off topic, but since you asked that, I think about that, like what are you doing in terms of staffing your fixed operations and planning for a day when you're selling as many wrench turning jobs as you are now? When does that happen? Does it happen 5 years or 10 years? I don't know, but it will happen. Like it's going to happen. And it's like the slowest moving freight train coming right at you in your P&L. And that problem is a people problem. Yeah. Staffing issue. I'll just stop there.
Well, you bring up a good point, right? We have a lot of brands. I mean, we have like 85% of the industry covered, right? We have all the tier one luxury brands, Honda, all the domestic brands, right? So, and everybody's approach to all these issues, right, is different. Some are all in, right, with electrification. Toyota and Honda are sitting back like they often do and say, we're not so sure. So I've always believed that strategy is situational, right? Every franchise, every market, and every group of people within each store is unique. So you game plan to your situation, you game plan to your talent. That doesn't mean you're, stick your head in the sand, but at this point, like I said, I'm always, the analogy I lose is get out on the front of the boat, right? And stick your head out and look for logs, right? And I mean, just, stay focused on the realities of your markets, track the data, know your market, look for changing dynamics, right? And when it's appropriate, start to make those adjustments. You're right. Those long-term issues are very interesting ones, Adam. And, we're expanding service, right? We're investing, I think fixed operations, used cars, there may be a cottage industry, right? For when somebody's favorite vehicle stops getting built, right? There's going to be a lot of people that we're going to look like Cuba, right? We're going to have cars on the road for 10, 20, 30 years, right? People, who knows, right? So there's opportunities. There's always some aspect of major changes like this that we didn't anticipate or expect. I think the fixed business is going to be hugely important. I think the revenue opportunities for the retail dealer, like you said, Adam, they may shift. We're already making money in different ways than we ever have before. I mean, last month was a great example as, new car volume drops by 25% and goes back to, 2010 levels. We still did fine. We sold more used cars. We fixed finance, right? So, you again, a willingness to reinvent yourself as those realities come up, are all you can control.
Yep.
We're getting a little tight on time, but I wanted to ask one other. We talked a little about some of the smaller groups, but I'm wondering, with a larger, medium to larger size group like yours, John, how do you push that sort of culture change down through your organization? How do you get all your general managers, your sales managers across 3 states, to embrace what, to pick up on what you're putting down?
You evangelize. I mean, you said it. That's probably my number one job. I'm in every store twice a month, right? Sitting with the general manager and the groups, and I'll sit with we acquired 3 stores this year. I'm in Arizona right
Congratulations.
now at a new store, right? And what am I doing? I'm meeting with everyone, right? Managers as a group, individually, because it starts with me, right? If they can feel a connection with me in my role, right? So that I think it requires an intentional effort by someone at the top of the organization that defines the direction, that defines who we are, right? It's my job to help everybody understand who and what we are and why we do why is probably the most important piece, right? Especially generationally, they want to know why we're doing what we're doing, and instead of just saying this is what we're going to do, go get them, right? There has to be a discussion of why we do what we do and what we believe in. I think that makes it, I think it solves a lot of those problems. So, and I expect my general managers to do that work, so that means they have to be able to evangelize. They have to have those skills and abilities. It's not enough to just do the work. They have to be true leaders, right? They have to spread the gospel, so to speak, and push it down through the organization. They're the ones. I have my, my role. But I think ultimately, if you do it right, the best cultures are self-policing. When you really sell it hard and people really buy into who we are and what we do, they monitor and police, the violators on their own.
Well, like you said, if they know why, they can
Right.
continue to think and they can adapt themselves and send ideas up to you about how to follow through on the why.
And then they take ownership, right? Ownership starts with being part of the decision-making process on why we do what we do. So we try to give everybody a seat at the table. It doesn't mean I'm going to do exactly what you want all the time, but you're going to have a seat at the table and you're going to have a chance to give input, right? And you're going to get a chance to hear my perspective too. So I think it's collaborative is a cliche term, but continuous, candid communication is foundational. And so you have to create forums for that, both at an organizational level and at a store level. Continuous, candid communication with everyone solves a lot of problems.
Yeah, that's great. Adam, did you have any closing note you wanted to add on, or just?
I mean, I could not say it, possibly say it any better than John just did. So you heard it from one of the best.